3D platformers. One of, if not my favorite genre of video games, but something I would never want to do in real life. You might not be old enough to remember, but there was once a dark age of 3D platformer games where nothing was coming out. There was 3D World, Sonic Lost World, and that's really it. There was probably some more that came out during that time, but there wasn't much. Even on Steam, I remember a time where there wasn't even 50 games in the 3D platformer category, and most of the games were just older ones like Sonic Adventure. This was also during that boom of amazing indie games. Stuff like Super Meat Boy, Fez, and Undertale. But even with all these indie games coming out, none of them were 3D platformers. It wasn't until 2017 that the 3D platformer genre really came back, and from there things have only gone up, with indie developers giving us a ton of great games. I honestly thought that the genre was dead 10 years ago. There was an oversaturation in the 2000s, so I just thought everyone was burnt out. But here we are, and there's almost too many to keep track of, and I wouldn't want it any other way. With so many 3D platformers out there, it might be tough to choose which ones to play with our limited time on this earth before we... Here are 5 indie 3D platformers that I have played and enjoyed enough to recommend to you all. This video is in no particular order. Did you ever want to play as Gooey's little cousin and roll around? No? Well, you're getting that anyway with this first game, Crumble. In Crumble, you play as this happy little blue thing as you attempt to roll to the end of the level and get in your rocket ship. You might be wondering, what is this world? Why is this blue guy trying to fly a rocket ship? Even the weirdest of games have some sort of story or lore, but there's literally nothing here, as far as I know. And that's okay. The focus here is on the physics platforming. I'd say the closest comparison gameplay-wise would be Super Monkey Ball or Marble It Up, but there is more of an emphasis on platforming here. Along with the simple ball rolling and the jumping, you also get a sticky tongue that acts as a grapple. You can use your tongue to get up to higher platforms, save yourself from falls, or give yourself a little more momentum to keep the speed going. That's probably my favorite thing about these type of ball rolling games, is the sense of speed you get when you're able to get it and maintain it. It feels super rewarding to rush through some of these levels and get those anime line effects. The gameplay is simple, but the fun for me is when you get into the zone and begin to zoom through these levels. Their creative level design also keeps you on your toes, especially later on in the game. The earlier levels are simple and easy enough, nothing too hard. However, many levels later on don't give you much breathing room. Either it be because of the unstable platforms that easily fall over, bombs being shot at you. This game really rushes you. That doesn't mean the levels are hard. I found some parts of the game to be challenging due to how precise you need to be, but the tongue grapple is pretty generous and checkpoints are frequent for the most part. Despite it not being challenging, I must admit that there were a few parts where my anxiety was heightened and I needed to lock in. For some, even with how generous this game can be, it can be stressful. If you're more into 3D platformers with larger worlds to explore, then this game might not be for you, as these levels tend to be more linear, with very few collectibles to find. However, if you're in the mood for a fun platformer, then this one is definitely one I recommend. It's available on Steam for $15, but if that's too much for a game that can be beaten in around 2 hours, I've seen it go as low as $5 on sale, and at that price I think it's definitely worth it. Here's a character I bet no one wanted for Smash Bros. Ultimate. If you weren't thrilled with the idea of rolling around as a ball, perhaps I could convince you to play a game about rolling around as a box. A literal cardboard box with no face, no dialogue, no nothing. Just a box. As a sentient box, your job is to take up missions from other boxes around the world and collect stamps. How does one get around playing as a box? As I just mentioned, you roll around. The moveset in the game is quite simple, as you only have a roll, jump, ground pound, and up to 6 bonus jumps called unboxing. You can get some serious speed and airtime if you time these extra jumps just right. Besides its creative concept, playing as a self-delivering box, the game is a pretty simple 3D platformer. You roll around to different points on the map and complete different missions. These can include platforming, time deliveries, or third-person shooting sections. Yes, there are parts of this game where other boxes are shooting at you, and you're tasked to shoot them with rockets, and it's pretty radical. This game is definitely on the easier side, as times for missions are extremely generous, some of which you can complete with more than half the time remaining, even if you make some mistakes. The good thing about the less difficult nature of this game is that it does alleviate some of the smaller issues that Newbie's Adventure has at times. First are the controls, which for a 3D platformer aren't the most precise. When you stop or turn, it takes a moment for your character to pull off your desired action. Again, this isn't a huge issue since there isn't that much precise platforming in this game, and you can save yourself with the extra jumps, but there were a couple instances where it threw me off. The controls are honestly fine for the game they are in. Another small gripe is the combat, or the lack thereof. Even if you can use rockets, they aren't available throughout the world, so your only means of fighting back is to slam the ground. Oftentimes it's too slow, or just won't work and enemies will get a hit on you. Again, this isn't a huge deal as you only lose jumps if you are hit, but the lack of combat and the abundance of enemies can make some missions or boss fights a little unfun. The last complaint is the long load times, sometimes taking up to a minute just to get in. Once you're in, it's smooth sailing from there and a ton of fun, but those long load times are something to be aware of. Enough about the negatives. This is supposed to be a recommendation video, but the few negatives are quite minor and aren't ones that should deter you from trying out this game if you're interested in it. Besides the premise, there isn't anything particularly unique about this game, but it is what I think a game should be, most importantly.
Fun.
The game throws you right into the world, and after a short tutorial, you're off to do whatever you please, wasting very little of your time. I also have an appreciation for this game, as this game came out right before 3D platformers became cool again. It was an open world 3D platformer, something that I had been craving for so long when it came out, and it filled that need for something of this genre just a little longer until Mario Odyssey came out. It's also longer than most indie 3D platformers. I mean, it's only a little over 5 hours long, but that's still much longer than most other games of its genre. Unbox is available on the Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Steam. Even if you're on the fence about it, I'd still recommend wishlisting it and waiting for a sale, as I've seen this game get as low as $4. It won't blow your mind, but it's another fun 3D platformer that you can check out if you're a fan of the genre. When making this video, I didn't choose what I thought were my favorite 3D platformers, but a variety of different types of 3D platformers that are great in what they're trying to accomplish. Frogun is a little different as it is slower paced than the other games in this video, but does have more of an emphasis on precision platforming and having quick reflexes. I'd say that Frogun is similar to that of the sections of Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker from 3D World. The levels are smaller, and many times you'll need to adjust the camera to help you find secrets, such as many of the bonus challenges which are found in holes that are obscured if you don't move the camera around. There are a few instances where the perspective definitely threw me off and had me fall to my death, but as there are no lives in this game, it wasn't that frustrating. What makes Frogun unique is the weapon you use, which is, you guessed it, the Frogun, a gun with the head of a frog that shoots out its own tongue that you can either grab on the enemies, pull levers, or propel Renata forward when you use it against a wall. Much of the game is designed around this gun, and many of the precision platforming sections require you to have perfect aim with it. Similar to Kirby, you can grab on the enemies and shoot them out to break boxes or kill other enemies, and this is your only method of attacking. A reliable weapon, but not something that should be abused, as spamming this weapon can have you latch onto walls and send you flying off the map. Even though the levels are smaller, they are crammed with collectibles for you to grab. You'd have to try and miss any of them because they are literally everywhere, and much of the challenge comes from getting all the collectibles. Getting to the end of the levels aren't much of a challenge. Most of the difficulty comes from the sections needed to get the collectibles. They aren't required in order to beat the game, but they are needed to open chests, which reward you with more hit points. This is extremely helpful for boss fights in this game. I always try to be positive when I talk about games, especially ones I am recommending to you all, but I have to mention the bosses. Frogun is a slower paced game where there is little to no combat, and that's not really an issue until the bosses. I'm already not a fan of bosses where you have to wait for their attack patterns to end before you can do anything, but here, you're sometimes waiting what feels like an eternity for them to finish, as your movement is limited. Dodging attacks isn't really fun, as you're usually just running around in circles most of the time, and with how limited the combat is here, there's rarely any unique ways to fight these bosses. One good thing about the bosses, though, is the music. Not just the boss music, but the entire soundtrack is really good. Despite the bosses, there isn't much else I have a major issue with in this game. There are plenty of great games out there with even worse boss fights than Frogun, so I don't think that should be a reason to dismiss this game. If you're a huge fan of games with an almost overwhelming amount of collectibles to get, then Frogun is definitely one for you. There's also a sequel, which I haven't tried, but if it's as good as the first one, then I bet it'll be worth picking up. If you like Sonic Adventure, then get this game. Man, Sonic fans are so lucky to have such a devout fan base in its community to do the job of Sega. I mean, when there was no 2D Sonic games coming out, Freedom Planet came in clutch. Sonic Robo Blast 2 is a unique take on 3D Sonic, and Rollin' Rascal looks great. However, as far as I know, there hasn't been much done to replicate the Sonic Adventure games. I mean, seriously, for how long Sonic fans have been waiting for either a remaster or a new game, I'm surprised Sega hasn't done anything. It's basically free money at this point. Even just giving us a Chao Garden game would be enough for most fans, but it's Sega after all. So once again, coming in clutch is Spark the Electric Jester 2, giving us the closest thing to a new Sonic adventure that we have right now. It isn't a one-to-one recreation of those games, but the inspiration is clearly there, from the gameplay, the menu designs, and the music. This is early 2000 Sonic to a T. Like Sonic Adventure, speed is the name of this game, but unlike Crumble, speed isn't that hard to maintain as you're quick to pick it up. Plus, you also have a mini boost that helps you get off to a quick start, run up walls, or dodge enemy attacks. There's also some simple combat in this game that's quick and snappy. There are enemies everywhere in these levels, but there are only a few times where you have to stop and fight them, and usually those parts are done with fast. The main bulk of your combat will be the bosses. I feel the same way about these bosses as I do about the ones from Sonic Frontiers, that they're super easy, but since you're moving so fast and you have a badass song going on in the back, you really don't care about the lack of difficulty. As is par for the course for 3D platformers, this game is short. Really short. Like, so short that it's possible for you to play, beat it, and refund on Steam. As someone who usually supports emulation or being stingy, I don't condone refund in this game. The developers definitely put a lot of time and effort into it, so even if it is short, you should still support the work that went into it. Like I said, if you like Sonic from the early 2000s, this game will be right down your alley. There's also 2 other Spark the Electric Jester games for you to try out if you like this one. The first one is more akin to the classic 2D Sonic games, while the third one is more like the second from the looks of it. I haven't played either, but the reviews of both of them show that they are great as well. When it comes to retro-style games, most of the games that come to mind are those that have a pixel art style. Games like Shovel Knight, Fez, and Celeste are just some of the many games that have this type of style. However, despite how unique the graphics of the N64 are, not many games have replicated that style. Cavern of Dreams is one of those few games that uses this style to create a game that feels like it came from that era, the biggest of those inspirations clearly being Banjo-Kazooie. Not only the aesthetic, but with the different elements of the gameplay, such as having various worlds connected by a large hub world, that is a level within itself with different areas to explore and puzzles to solve. Despite all these clear inspirations though, Cavern of Dreams still has its own identity. Again, like Banjo-Kazooie, your moveset is limited when you first begin, being limited to a jump and a roll. As you collect more eggs, the stars or jiggies of this game, you gain more abilities that are necessary to progress. This game does have some platforming in it, but has more of a focus on solving simple puzzles. These are usually pretty easy to solve, using visual cues around the environment. Unlike most 3D platformers that either have guides to show you where the main collectibles are, or have a somewhat linear path to follow, this game is a little bit different. Many times you'll be walking into an area and just stumble into one that has an egg in it, usually indicated by an audio cue. My favorite thing about many 3D platformers is allowing the players the choices in what challenges they want to complete. Examples are in Mario Odyssey and how the moon count is so high, or in Battle for Bikini Bottom where you can skip entire levels to beat the game if you have enough golden spatulas. That freedom is present here where you can have the time to explore a level, go into each area, and decide whether or not you want to finish a challenge or not. Luckily, the worlds in these games aren't too big, so it's difficult to forget what you've done and haven't done. The smaller parts also reduce some of the more tedious parts of this game. When you have enough eggs for an ability, you're notified to go back to the main hub to receive that ability. This annoyed me at first, but getting around takes no more than a few minutes, and there's only a few times you have to do this. One other thing to note about this game is the lack of combat or health. There are enemies here, but they act more like obstacles that will knock you away, and sometimes in the bottomless pits. There are also no lives here, so fall as many times as you like. Whether this is a bad thing is entirely up to you. Despite the lack of enemies, Cavern of Dreams can give you an unnerving feeling at times. Not intentionally, this isn't a horror game or anything, but some parts do have an eerie feeling to them that gives you that thought in the back of your head that something bad is going to happen. It's hard to explain why, but it just gives off that feeling. Kind of similar to some levels of Banjo-Kazooie, like Clanker's Cavern, or the original Xbox's home screen. It's something that definitely would have scared me if I was little playing this game. If you're looking for something more like the classics, then Cavern of Dreams is my top 3D platformer suggestion for you. It's short, but yet it sucks you in and has you forget that an hour has passed since you've started playing it. With AAA companies seemingly staying away from the 3D platformer genre, it isn't that big of an issue anymore because we know the genre is in good hands thanks to indie developers. We know that they'll pick up the slack of those who once made games of these kind. With all these great games that have come out and will continue to come out, it makes me optimistic for the future of this genre. Also, I limited this video to 5 games, but there's certainly more amazing indie 3D platformers I haven't mentioned. If you have any suggestions for other games, put them down in the comments for me or for others to check out. But for now, that's the end of the video. See you all in 3 months when I make my next video.